Good evening. My name is Jeremy Rosen. I'm the acting director of the Tanner Humanities Center, and I'm an associate professor of English here at the University of Utah. It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you tonight to our Authors Meets Readers event with Joy Harjo. The Tanner Humanities Center aims to advance humanities exploration and engagement through academic research, educational enrichment, and public outreach. This year marks our 35th anniversary, and we're grateful to the Tanner family's multi-generational commitment to the center and our work. I can't tell you how thrilled we are to have such an incredible turnout tonight, how wonderful it is to be back in person and coming together for intellectual community and conversation at a public humanities event. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is a traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the university's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. Thank you. And I really want to say, for me, an event like tonight's offers an opportunity for us to really live those values and commitments. I want to offer a special welcome to the members of our local tribal communities who are in attendance. And I want to say that we're grateful you're here and that the University of Utah is committed to serving you and your communities. I also want to thank the following organizations and individuals who made tonight's event possible: O.C. Tanner, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the R. Harold Burton Foundation, the College of Humanities, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, the King's English Bookshop, Office of the Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs, the Salt Lake Arts Council, Salt Lake County Zoo Arts and Parks Program, Utah Humanities, and the Utah Humanities Book Festival. I also would be remiss if I didn't thank the outstanding staff at the Tanner Humanities Center: Beth James, our Associate Director; Susan Anderson, the Development Officer; Missy Weeks, our Marketing and Communications Coordinator; Sean Collins, our Graduate Research Assistant; and Skylar Fetter, our Environmental Humanities Graduate Fellow. Woo-hoo. And now I'd like to welcome to the stage the President of the University of Utah, Taylor Randall.
Good evening. What a pleasure it is to be here with you, and welcome to this outstanding event. You know, this event is part of the statewide Utah Humanities Book Festival, and it is the 25th anniversary of this festival, a remarkable feat. Thank you. This event has actually grown to be the largest book festival in Utah, inspiring Utah communities with over 100 events this fall. We are very proud to partner with this festival. The Author Meets Reader events really allows all of us an opportunity to explore both poetry tonight and social issues in a deeper, more intimate way. This event, of course, is made possible through the Tanner Humanities Center and funds received from the endowment, National Endowment for the Humanities. These will support Joy Harjo's visit to the campus, and also to conduct a workshop for Utah teachers on Native American poetry. The University of Utah is very proud to have a relationship with the Ute tribe. As you know, we are one of a handful of universities that has a close relationship with this land's native peoples. This is the Ute tribe's historic native homeland. The Utes, of course, is the name of our sports teams, and we use that name with the full support of the tribe since 1972. Our memo of understanding with the Ute tribe really has two goals. One, to build genuine respect and understanding of the tribe's history, culture, and contributions to the state and the American West. And two, to assist tribal members in helping their children lead healthy lives and prepare for college and the pursuit of higher education. To those ends, we do a number of things on this campus. We have created the American West Center to conduct research on behalf of the American West Much of the scholarship is done on behalf of the tribes in this area, including preserving many of the oral histories of the Ute Indian tribe. We've established the American Indian Resource Center, which was established actually in 1991 to serve as a place of support for students and tribal members that are here serving on our campus as faculty and staff. This summer, we were also proud to announce that any member of the 8 tribes affiliated with the Utah region can also attend the University of Utah free of tuition and fees. It's absolutely been my pleasure as president to meet with tribal leaders to understand their educational needs and their desires for the youth of their nations. We're extremely excited to be partnering in this way and hope that that partnership will expand even more. What's come to light is that even beyond student fees and tuition, we've got to make sure that we provide a set of wraparound services so individuals feel comfortable here with us and so that we can actually more deeply understand their history and their culture. To me, this is the reason a university exists. It's one of the few times, perhaps many of us in our lives, will have a chance to interact with so many different cultures and build a sensitivity to what this world is, that hopefully we can promote positive dialogues. I hope tonight is a piece of that for all of you. I am thrilled that you will be able to spend some time with Joy and understand her thoughts and listen to her poetry. Please enjoy this evening.
And now I'd like to welcome the Dean of the College of Humanities, our new Dean, an outstanding advocate and spokesperson for the humanities, Hollis Robbins.
Thank you so much. Good evening. I'm Hollis Robbins, Dean of the College of Humanities, and delighted to introduce this Tanner Center conversation with the sublime Joy Harjo. Catherine Coles was unable to join us this evening, but we're fortunate to have in her place the excellent Dr. Elizabeth Archuleta, Associate Chair and Associate Professor in the Division of Ethnic Studies in the School for Cultural and Social Transformation. Dr. Archuleta is also a mentor and an advocate for first-generation and historically underrepresented students in higher education. She teaches courses in Indigenous Studies, American Indian Literature, and American Indian Women. And she has written, I had a chance to read some of her work today in preparation to introducing her, and she has written about how markers, monuments, and stone memorials tell stories. Who gets a Mount Rushmore and who does not? Who or what gets remembered or forgotten? Joy Harjo, former poet laureate, the first Native American poet laureate, teacher, author, musician, advocate, member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, American Academy of Arts and Sciences, has also played a crucial role in answering the question of who or what gets remembered or forgotten. Working in a literary tradition that involves oral storytelling practice, Harjo has been publishing poetry since the 1970s. I've long loved Harjo's notion that written text is fixed orality. I love that her poetry has been blasted into space by NASA and is being sent to the Jupiter-Trojan asteroids and then to a stable orbit around the sun for a million years. That is some kind of permanence. I want to note particularly her editorship of the Norton Poetry Anthology, Living Nations, Living Words, an Anthology of First Peoples Poetry, 2021, which I was lucky enough to read in an advance copy. It's a sad fact that in the poetry world that most Americans get their poetry from school book anthologies. This is how Americans know their Longfellow and Robert Frost. As a scholar of poetry anthologies, I know how this works. The good thing is that school book anthologizers get their poetry from other anthologies. And in the course of the ongoing diversification of the poetic canon, I am hopeful that works by Natalie Diaz, Layli Long Soldier, and Joy Harjo, of course, will evermore be included in tomorrow's school book anthologies to be remembered and not forgotten. Living Natures, Living Words at 240 pages can't possibly contain all the works of poetry from 500 federally recognized tribes, but it's an important start. We are poets, Harjo has said. We have accomplished poets, and we had poets long before there was an entity called America. We were here. We are here. We didn't disappear or die, but we are living voices, and we are poets. I'm delighted to welcome Joy Harjo in conversation with Elizabeth Archuleta.
Is this on? Oh, yes, it is.
Yeah, I'm checking.
Oh.
Yeah, this is on too.
Okay.
This looks like a weapon.
I wanted to start off by having you read some pieces. I think I shared them with you. But I chose these pieces based on some work I was doing last year on all of your writing, and these just kind of resonated with me. And so I chose an excerpt from Crazy Brave, where you talk about your poem and the birthing of the poem, I Give You Back, For Earth's Grandsons in American Sunrise, and Prepare in your latest memoir, Poet Warrior.
Okay, I don't know what all I have with me. I don't have
I
any
have
of
them
those.
all right here, marked, and
I actually
in
have
order.
2 new books and another anthology.
Yes, so they're with the markings on them.
So this one, okay. Well, it's really good to be here and to hear, you guys have an amazing president. Usually they're trying to keep natives, suppress, but no, that's amazing, and that tuition, that says something. That says something here. It all really goes back to the head, really. You can tell in an organization, in an airlines, I've been flying a lot, what's going on by how everyone is. So that's a good sign. Humanities, a human being. Okay, yes, so I wanted to say too before I start is that this event opened before we got here, and I've been honored by Amelia Afa and her family. They brought gifts in honor of this, and this is the best. They offer the best that from their family, and this is a tapa mat. And if you know the culture, it's made by, she was saying it's made by a circle, the people, the women, the family all gets in and makes it. It's sort of like a poem, you see, and this mat here. So I wanted to let you know that this is part of the performance. This is part of all of us tonight. And to say, Maro, mahalo, thank you for these gifts that have blessed your family and those who made them, and will bless my family and all of you here. Thank you. So this is from Crazy Brave, and I have a second memoir, Poet Warrior, and I have a third one I'm signing a contract for. I'm not doing any more after that. And as my editor said, I reinvented memoir, and I just do what I do. Let's see. This is from Crazy Brave, and I guess I wanted to say too, Joy Harjo, Chifkiros. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or the Muskogee Creek Nation Reservation, recently reaffirmed by the McGirt decision, and a member of Ogiabova Ceremonial Grounds. Thank you. Though on the surface, and I got to speak with students today, and I loved being with them and talking with them, and I didn't start out to become a poet. I was into art, and actually my first semester of school was pre-med, but that's another story. It's all related to healing in a way. And So, yeah, I didn't start out with that, but I remember what it was like to be a student, and we all have our stories. We don't always know everybody's story or what people go through. Somebody might appear to have everything, and they might live in a kind of personal hell. We don't know. And so it's important to have compassion. But I didn't plan to be a writer. I was going to the University of New Mexico, and I was part of Native Student Club. We were involved in a lot of social justice, Native rights actions, and often our students would go to those. We would, because the communities, around Albuquerque, the Native communities would ask us students to come and to listen and to help them when they were talking to these uranium companies and coal companies and dealing with other issues that were affecting the quality of lives of Native peoples. And that's where my poetry started, was being part of that and listening to those eloquent testimonies and then the song language of people. And that's what brought me to poetry. But sometimes there were tests, and sometimes we didn't know the word. The historical trauma wasn't in the vernacular then, but we all dealt with it. And I realized that what happened at UNM, and I was a single mother with 2 children and working and going to school, that at one point it all hit me hard. And this was sort of around that time. Though on the surface, I continued as a student who garnered scholarships and made excellent grades and was now beginning to publish my first poems in the University Student magazine, I continued to struggle with panic. I considered all the possible reasons: the mother-in-law witching, tribal history, the strangle of jealousy from others, the banishment from my home, faltering into territory and offending spirits there. But no matter the reasoning, it remained a fact of my life. I recalled how the dream of the chase began around the time our father left home. It would begin with the sound, just like the panic, like the whirring bull roars making an eerie echo that traveled across time, and I would begin running. One night, after writing my last paper for a class, I struggled in a sweaty, anxiety-ridden sleep. I was running, and then I was cornered in a white room. I could not find my voice. In all the years of the chase, I had never come to this place. I heard a congested, snuffling breathing. The monster rose up before me. I saw him for the first time. The horror transfixed me. I had no room in my mind for such a being. I realized how tired I was of the chase, of all the years of the chase. Just when I was about to give up, the knowing reminded me that I knew how to fly. I thought, fly, you know how it is in dreams. And I leapt to the ceiling of the white room. I felt safe. Then the monster flew up. There was nothing else I could do. With a sudden, unexpected grace, all the fear within me escaped. There was no panic. I was a lightness I had never experienced before in my life. The monster put his hand to me. It did not touch me. He disappeared. I was free, free, free. I carried that dream back through several layers of consciousness to where I stood in the future with a stack of poems and a saxophone in my hands. That night, I wrote this poem. It was one of my first poems. And then there's the poem, the fear poem. I don't know, do you want me to read that? Yeah. Yeah? It works. You can use this poem. I mean, that's the way our poetry and songs are. They're meant to be useful, sometimes beautifully useful. I release you, my beautiful and terrible fear, I release you. You are my beloved and hated twin, but now I don't know you as myself. I release you with all the pain I would know at the death of my children. You are not my blood anymore. I give you back to the soldiers who burned down my home, beheaded my children. raped and sodomized my brothers and sisters. I give you back to those who stole the food from our plates when we were starving. I release you, fear, because you hold these scenes in front of me, and I was born with eyes that can never close. I release you, I release you, I release you, I release you. I am not afraid to be angry. I am not afraid to rejoice. I am not afraid to be black. I am not afraid to be white. I am not afraid to be hungry. I am not afraid to be full. I am not afraid to be hated. I am not afraid to be loved, to be loved, to be loved, fear. Oh, you've choked me, but I gave you the leash. You have gutted me, but I gave you the knife. You have devoured me, but I laid myself across the fire. I take myself back, fear. You are not my shadow any longer. I won't hold you in my hands. You can't live in my eyes, my ears, my belly, my voice, my heart, my heart, my heart, my heart. But come here, fear. I am alive, and you are so afraid of dying. So it's kind of intense to read that right off the beginning.
Can I share why I wanted you to read that at the beginning?
What's that?
Can I share why I wanted you to read that from the very beginning, in spite of its intensity? It's for any of the Indigenous students who might be in the audience.
Okay.
Just with what we've been going through lately with COVID and with the trauma I see that my students are going through, this is something that's powerful. It's like, this mantra you're repeating, I release you, I'm not afraid of you, fear. And so just to see you move out of that place of vulnerability and fear and panic to where you're at now, I think it just provides a good role model for our students. And, I teach that poem all the time because it is that powerful. And so seeing the place that you've moved from in that memoir and seeing where you've moved to your more recent writings, I've seen this growth in you. And I encourage my students to engage in writing because that excerpt ends with how you found poetry was that night. Words came to you, language came to you. And I think that writing can be a form of, it is a form of healing. Putting words to the page and releasing them from your body. And I love that piece, even though it can be very intense.
Yeah, it is intense, but it doesn't mean that the fear stopped. It doesn't mean that the panic or, I did work through a lot of that, what was there, but it's still, we all, you come to know it in different ways, and we still continue to get tested or come up. We're here to be challenged. And to find it in language was a big thing because I liked painting. I come from a family of, on my father's side, painters and people who cared a lot about the community, people who fought against Andrew Jackson and were part of the Battle of Horseshoe Bend against the illegal move to Indian Territory and so on. But for me, painting, from a little kid, that was I lived in my dreams a lot. And I liked painting and doing art. I was always doing art. And the word thing was not my thing. I always sat in the back and wouldn't talk. And except I got pulled into plays because the teacher said I had a voice that carried. That's funny. And but the thing I liked about doing art is I didn't have to use words, and I felt clumsy with words. I felt really clumsy. And that's the thing. I think it's like a calling. It's like I didn't come up saying I was going to be a poet. I mean, I liked writing. My mother wrote songs, and she loved poetry. But I think it all kind of came together when I was part of Kiva Club. That was important community for me, our students, and you know, and IAIA, I went there when it was a Bureau of Indian Affairs school with mostly high school students back in the late 60s, and we were doing arts. But I think the writing came of a convergence, and then going out and seeing what was going on, and there was a kind of consciousness that had already been planted in me by my ancestors long before I was here. And I think that's what happens with us. Sometimes something ripens. And the writing totally surprised me. I started meeting Native, I think what did it, and someone was mentioning about, the new, is it the dean, who about, you know, often we're not in textbooks. So you don't know that we could be poets, or at least poets that wind up, you know, there's poetry in all of our, you know, oratory and things we do. But it was hearing Native poets for the first time, meeting Leslie Silko, who became a mentor of sorts, and hearing it, and I just started writing, and it took over. It surprised me. I was not really a word person. I love words, and I read. I was always a big reader. But I think that I've come to know we all have gifts, and like I said, there's a ripening, and then it's important to develop them and to use them, because they're not just for us. They're put here to be shared. All of our gifts, even if our gift is being able to fix cars, which is very important. You know, we're all put here to help each other out. So the word thing came, and I had to follow it. You know, I was telling the students earlier that I was, you know, on one side of my family, I was first generation. On the other side, my grandmother and my great aunt got their BFAs in art back, you know, right around statehood. My grandmother, Naomi Harjo, played saxophone in Indian Territory. You know, I say put that in your list of images of Native women. You know, way back. But yeah, so it just, I don't really understand it. And I write about that a little bit in Poet Warrior. It just kind of, it came out of this convergence of this need that was larger than me. And it just, I mean, it didn't make sense, because as a first generation, you know, everybody was going to get useful degrees that they could go back and help their people. And what use is poetry? I remember people thinking, poetry? Who do you know who makes a living as poetry? I mean, who do you know? I had little kids. But I knew, and we all have that. We're all born with it. Sometimes we forget to listen or we don't pay attention. But I knew beyond anything that made sense, it came that I had to follow it. It wasn't easy. It still isn't at times. But because at times you'll find yourself the only one believing in yourself. At times you'll find yourself in whatever you do that, you know, sometimes what you do doesn't make sense. But it was something I had to, it was larger than me. And I respect it, and I try to honor it and take care of it. Sometimes I failed, and it will only let me write, you know, there's fashions in poetry. I try to do really cute stuff, you know, or stuff that's in the style that everybody else is doing, and it won't work. It has its own voice. And my saxophone voice is the same voice, my flute voice. It has that same kind of quality and tone. And I'm still trying to understand it. But it's taught me, it's a teacher. We all have teachers, all kinds of teachers. Some of them are the professors you have. Some are other students. Some are parents and family members. Some of them are the plants. I have really good plant teachers right now. You know, we have a lot of teachers, and we're all here to teach in some way or the other.
You reminded me of the poem you have in American Sunrise. I think it's called Redbird Love, where you and your partner are watching a family, or two redbirds, building a relationship together, building their nest, having the next generation.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's a lot that I pulled out of that poem about, you know, what we can learn by watching the natural world, how to be better humans by seeing the care and the tenderness that these two birds put into building their nest for their hatchlings that they would have.
It really shifts the world. We've built such a human-centric world, and of course, and I would say worlds more than one, because we exist in like a family world. We exist in our own private world, which can be many worlds. We exist in a community. There's a state of Utah world. There's a University of Utah world. And this earth we're in together, we exist in all kinds. And the animals, their world is just as intense. I've been thinking about writing a children's series of this. One time I was on a flight going from probably Houston, it's one of those Houston or Miami to get way south, to go to South America. And there was a fly that was on the plane. And I was thinking, the fly got off with us. I think it was Medellin or someplace, and I thought, I wonder about that fly, think about it. And then somebody says, well, if you write that story, they don't have a very long life. And I said, yeah, but in their sensibility, their life is as large as ours. And I was thinking that might be my next series, because I've got a children's book coming out in March, and I love writing with, being around children and writing for them, because it makes you think. I mean, there are so many different overlapping worlds. Like the world in this cloth here, there's a lot of stories in there, in the designs and what people put into it. And it's like one of the images, and I wrote about it in Poet Warrior. I was in India, in Calcutta. There had been one of the biggest bookstores in the world, and the organizers got upset, and they had all these writers from all over the world, and they canceled the book fair. So we were taking our group, there were a lot of American writers, many of them you would know their names, and they took us all over. They started taking us around to read places. But I remember one time we were driving through the city in Calcutta, people everywhere, and we stopped at a light, and there was a traffic island. Not much, about half the size of this rug here. And there was a family. They had built a house out of scraps. And the mother was cooking dinner. It was really neat. They had it, she had a few pans, and she was cooking. And the father had his little girl on his lap, and she was wearing a yellow dress. And he was singing to her and playing with her. And they were making a life on this traffic island. And that always stayed with me, and I think about them and, try to send them, I wonder what happened, where they are. But I think about that, going places, there's so many different worlds. When you go into a community, you go by houses, and there's all these stories. And so why does, so you think about Native communities and stories, or all of our communities, the stories that we often see depicted are, Natives are often flatlined. Now we have reservation dogs, which tells a certain kind of, story. And kind of edgy and so on, and yet we need more of our real stories of people.
Well, I wanted to move to your new anthology and the mapping project you have online, but I wanted to comment that, reading your work, I kind of see this path that you follow, and you've been thinking about mapping, at least to me, for a long time. So, the journey you follow in your life in Crazy Brave, the way you've sectioned out Crazy Brave by the directions, east, north, south, west, and you've sectioned Living Nations, Living Words in the same way. And then in An American Sunrise, you include a map of the Trail of Tears, and you have a narrative poem called There Is a Map, and then the poem to your daughter, Directions to You. So I see mapping in a lot of your work, and then when I saw that you have the online mapping project, I was curious about that. So if you could talk a little bit about that mapping project, what prompted it, what's going to happen to it now that you're not the poet laureate anymore?
Yeah, actually that poem, Directions to You, was written by Rainy Dawn.
Oh, it was.
Yes, and I think that I should have probably put written by. I included, because I also included in American Sunrise, I included a poem by Emily Dickinson, and then I included one by my daughter, Rainey Dawn Ortiz, who is a wonderful beadworker, and
Yeah, that's a beautiful poem that she wrote. So.
she also did the, I don't have Poet Warrior right here. She did the artwork on, you don't, she did the artwork on there. Let's see, so what is it you just asked about? I'm jet lagging.
How the mapping project
Yes, the
came
mapping.
about,
Got it.
what's going to happen to it. Maybe you can just talk a little bit more about the concept of that.
So when it was announced that I was U.S. Poet Laureate, which was amazing and shocking and intense, and the first thing there were immediately a lot of reporters and the poets. I think since the last 2 or 3 poets have had projects. And the way it works is if you do a project, you get 2 years, and there's 2 of us that have done 3 years, but I think Robert Pinsky was part of a bicentennial thing, and me, it was COVID, because I wasn't able to get out and around. It wasn't because I was doing an excellent job. So, anyway, so I had all kinds of projects, man. Every interview I had a different project. Because I get a lot of ideas, but it came down to a mapping project. And when I went for orientation to the Library of Congress, I wanted to see what they were doing there and see they have so many collections. So I went to all of these there's photographs, and they pulled out old photographs of different tribal members, and then I went to the mapping. And I got the idea to do digital mapping project that would show that there are a lot of Native poets and we're still here, and it would show where we are on the map. And I asked 50, we wound up with 47, but we could have had several hundred. But we didn't have the person power to be able to input all of that and do everything that takes. And I picked a map that had no political boundaries, which are kind of the false boundaries anyway. There were no state lines, there was no border between Canada and the U.S., no border between Mexico and the U.S. It was earth and water. I really like thinking, yes, I really like thinking of it like that, just that, those community, earth and water. And so every poet, everyone picked their poem that they wanted in that anthology. And so now there's a collection they recorded, there's a recording on the map, a digital map, of them reading their poem and also talking about place, because some people, I think I probably placed myself in Tulsa, but I can tell you exactly, where my people are from. I've gone down and I even saw a house that belonged to an uncle in the southeast. People think that we were just hanging out in the woods and with no culture. And that's just not. We have very developed cultures and societies and so on. So that project is up and running, and there's a teacher's toolkit for that. But it would be great. I mean, I wanted to put every poet, every Native poet ever on there from time immemorial. And then also we have a lot of connections with poets all over. In this country, we're poets, we all know each other and all over the world, and just to show how that works, which might be hard to do in 3D mapping, maybe a holographic map. But we're trying to, there's a possibility, and I can't say which organization might take it over, but I understand that Paisley Rectal here has been working on a map, and some people have taken up, there was a community up in, I don't remember who it was in Washington State. They were doing that, I think, with Native poets up there and other poets. So, but it was important. I wanted people to know that I'm not the only Native poet, for one. There are a lot of us, and we have traditions too that go way, way back.
And what's going to happen with it? I mean, you said that somebody's going to pick up the project, but do you have a vision of maybe where you want it to go, or are you just handing it off to whoever might take it up?
I would probably hand it off. I've done my work on it. And I'm 71 now, and I'm still obviously, I'm not obsessive. But there's a lot of work to do. I'm working in my community to we help set up arts mentorships for young people. Several of us want to help start a cultural school with language and arts, and there's always so much to do, and working with, trying to, young women coming up, and then I have music I'm working, there's just so much to do, but the project is important, and so we hope that somebody else picks it up. I mean, the Library of Congress will keep it up as it is, but something like that is anybody that does online stuff, it has to be kept up to date. There's always that kind of thing that goes on, but it gets seen by a lot, and people know that there are so many of us. I mean, I know coming up, I've been writing, at least publishing for 50 years, and a lot of people will come up and say, well, we didn't know there were Native poets. This has been going on for years, or even still that happens. So you're the first Native poet, or we had no idea. We had no idea there were that many Native people. Everybody thinks, people still have those images in their minds, too, of this kind of one-dimensional image of who Native people are. Yeah.
So are there any favorite poems in the anthology that you want to read?
Have to, I think if you don't mind, this anthology came out before that one, and it's When the Light of the World Was Subdued, our songs came through, a Norton anthology of Native Nations poetry. And we were trying to, what was important, all the editors are Native poets, all the experts are Native poets, which was important. And we were trying to do it's not really comprehensive. I mean, you think about how many Native nations there are. We were first given 300 pages to do a book that goes way back. And, with everybody, we got it extended to 400, but we could have had 3 or 4 books this size. So I don't consider it comprehensive because there are people, I'm continually discovering people who could have been in here, and there were people who should have been in here who aren't because of, space and all of that. But we decided to arrange it again, looking at mapping by area of the country, by land, by geography. And what we found out, and so the sections are, and they're huge, like Northwest and Midwest, Northeast, Midwest, plains, mountains. I mean, the one that's really huge is Alaska, and then the Pacific Islands and the West Coast. I mean, Northwest, and that's huge. There's no way we could really comprehensively deal with that. But the one thing we came to learn after we put this out by sections, you can really see how colonization happened in every part, how different it was. And you can also come to understand plants in a way, how plants are, plants and different animals and the place, the geography of a place really influence our language and so on. But one of my favorite poems in here is, and they all are to some extent, was written by a kid at Carlisle Indian School. And it's anonymous. He wouldn't put his name in. And I remember I taught at Indian School too, and I've taught, and I've had students who don't want to read their poem out loud. Eventually they do. But he didn't want to, this was probably a poem that appeared in the student paper. They had a student newspaper. And it's anonymous Carlisle student called Anonymous Poet from Room 8. And then a little note says the military-style Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania was founded by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Henry Pratt in 1879 as a tool of assimilation, he was known for his infamous motto, "Kill the Indian and save the man." The school recruited more than 10,000 children from 141 tribes. I had relatives who went there. Many suffered and died from poor conditions at the school. 186 graves can be found there, and there are still more being located. This anonymous poem is noted as written in 1913. My industrial work, and I can just see him. I can just see this student. At 2:30 in the afternoon, you can find me in the 28 room, about 3 or 4 covers deep. You turn them back and you'll find me asleep. And there I lie and patiently wait for the final exams we have in room 8. When the whistle blows at 5:30, once more I am up and still alive. Then I run down and wash my face, then comb my hair, and I'm ready for grace. In 15 minutes, there's a bugle call, the troops fall in and the roll is called. Then out in front, the troops all stand, saluting the flag with our hats in our hand. While standing in the wind, our hair gets wavy. But just the same, we right face and march to gravy. Now this may sound like going a-fishing, but this is my only industrial position. I love the humor in that. I can just see a teenage boy writing that poem.
You know, in An American Sunrise, you talk a lot about the boarding school experience and the intergenerational impact that that has had. I mean, because the schools existed for over 100 years. And this is an unplanned question, but because it's been in the news so much recently, just the work that Deb Holland's doing in trying to replicate what's been taking place in Canada when the bodies of 250 children were found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. Yeah. Can you say a little bit about that and how that's made its way into your poetry, the boarding school experience?
Well, it's certainly been part of the story of America, or the story of colonization, and I don't know where in the world to start. I'm really happy to see that Deb is taking on this work. Deb is a very good poet. She was my student years ago, and I don't take credit for her poetry. She's just, as I was telling the students earlier, she came into my office to ask to get into a class of mine with a motorcycle helmet. And, you know, of course, I was struck by that. And she said, well, I'm saving fossil fuels. So there you go. It's real, you know. She's always had a great love for people and for the environment and for her community. But yes, there is so much of that history, that Indian school history, that is really, it's done a lot to harm people. I mean, think about it. If you know, we all have our children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews. I have great-grandchildren now, and the thought of anybody coming in and taking those babies away is, you cannot carry that. What do you do with that kind of grief? What do you do with it? I mean, can you imagine? I think of my little grandson, you know, and these little, just to have them pulled away. That, you know, and that's been going on at the border too. I mean, to me, it's like you get I guess the nomenclature now is triggered by that going on at the borders. And why? I mean, we're supposed to treat each other, you know, in the old ways, and I was lucky to be around. I didn't always remember everything. I don't have the best memory, which is not good for a memoirist to say. You know, the old people would say they're all our children. They are all our children, everyone, all of them. They're all about our future. They're carrying the stories. So, I mean, if you think about that, what do you do with that? And granted, I've gone back and looked at records, and I know people coming in, a lot of them had good intentions, you know. In their beliefs, they looked at us and thought, well, you know, I mean, that's also, you know, why aren't you living like us? We have the better way, and so on. And some people really did have good intentions, but to wholesale, like the guy kill the Indian, to come into a land and do that and just take over. We all suffer from it. Everybody does from that. It doesn't just, everyone suffers. And so I think the challenge now, and there's resistance to it, but how do we make a story? How do we make a story that includes all of this so that it can be healed? I mean, that's part of this. That's part of, you know, literature. I think of literature as healing. Yeah, I was in pre-med one semester because it's about healing. And how do we do this? It's hard. Some of the parts of the story are horrible. But somehow, sorry about that. That's my son calling me. Again, because he was. So how do we do that in our communities, where people are often right up against each other and say, well, my story is better, my God is right. Everybody, you know. What do we do with that? How do we find a way to make a story that allows that where everyone is respected for dignity, really for dignity? I think that's the thing here, and I think that reclamation of the story, it's what it is story reclamation. These children died. Okay, how do we say, okay, acknowledge that? It's not really, we're not going to get anywhere if we start judging people. That's one of my lessons, and I have to watch myself about judgment, is we have to let that go and keep it a healthy biosystem. It's just like a healthy cultural systems. The doors are open for understanding. There's a flow for understanding, for anagechka, for love, for compassion to flow through. Doesn't mean, you know, it doesn't come without challenge. I mean, we're in the planet of challenge. It doesn't come without that. But I would think that's what we need to work for, is that we come to an understanding with each other. And that's part of these stories. That's part of Black Lives Matter. That's part of all of that. It's like, wait, here I am. I'm a human being. Or like the river saying, here I am. I'm a human being. Or, you know, like the trees. Here I am. Here we are. And we're all here. And the reality is we are held here in our stories. But when we shut off or disconnect, so part of what's going on here with this, you know, looking at pulling up the graves, I mean, there's stories. You know, a lot of these children were buried with, they felt they were buried with shame. They were taught to be ashamed of being Native, taught to be ashamed of being, speaking their language. They were just little kids. And we need to unlock, because that shame follows us. Just like love follows us too. We're all here because somebody loved us in our ancestral, you know, everything we do, I was telling the students earlier, every accomplishment we do will affect our generations. Everything that we accomplish. And all of our prayers, all of our thoughts, they affect us in our communities right now, but they also affect the generations that follow. All of it.
Thank you for that. Jeremy said to watch for him. Okay, so I can't see you.
We're not done yet.
Okay, one more question. I had wanted to end with you doing a reading of either preparation that opens up Poet Warrior, or something of your own choice. You have so many beautiful things to offer up to read, but Bless This Land from An American Sunrise, you know, these visions of hope that your work offers. You know, you share all this heartbreak and tragedy from the past, but then you're always throwing out these visions of hope as well, and ways to empower ourselves. And so the piece that you read to open with, you know, is for Native students to know, you know, you can get past this. You know, you have to be strong. You are stronger than you know because of what your ancestors have lived through. And so if you have something to read.
Yeah, I can read
have
something.
A lot I would love for you to read.
I'll read a new poem. I hadn't even seen this yet. I mean, it's out officially November 1st, but there are copies here. It's called Weaving Sundown in a Scarlet Light, 50 Poems in 50 Years. And this one here, its birthday was 2 days ago, Catching the Light. It's from the Yale series called Why I Write. And so I didn't even know, but maybe I'll read this one. It's a short one. And I wrote it. It's kind of a pandemic poem, but it's also a poem. We lost a lot of culture bearers with our people. And I lost a brother-in-law to COVID, and he was so full of life and huge in his being, and my husband's favorite person to fight with. I don't know who he's going to fight with now. But, you know, I miss him. We miss him. And I was asked to write a poem for his service, but this wasn't the poem I wrote for it. This was part of getting there. But I was thinking about this life and how short it is, but how absolutely everything matters. And thinking about how I get excited about seeing everybody. Don't get worried, I'm not going right away. They're gonna make me work a lot more. It's fun. There's a lot to be done, and you know, it's a beautiful place. And but I was thinking about that and about why we're here. And sometimes we all have that question: what are we doing here? What does it mean? Where do we come from? Where are we going? And we all try to answer it in our own ways. And the thing to keep in mind is, you know, it's just like storytelling. Nobody's going to tell the story the same way. The world will keep trudging through time without us. When we lift from the story contest to fly home, we will be as falling stars to those watching from the edge of grief and heartbreak. Maybe then we will see the design of the two-minded creature and know why half the world fights righteously for greedy masters, and the other half is nailing it all back together through the smoke of cooking fires, lovers' trysts, and endless human industry. Maybe then, beloved rascal, we will find each other again in the timeless weave of breathing. We will sit under the trees in the shadow of earth's sorrows, watch hyenas drink rain, and laugh. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Joy, and thank you, Elizabeth. And I kind of hate to stop you from reading. It's an ignominious task up here. But we do have a little bit of time for our audience questions. There's a microphone just below me here, and if you'd like to ask a question, you can come up and...
It's my job to hand it.
Oh, great. Missy's going to hand it to people. We did receive a couple pre-submitted questions from the audiences at home, and I'm gonna just maybe start with one of those while Missy fields questions from the audience, and I can't see out there either. So one question, Joy, was that you've held quite a number of public posts, most notably as poet laureate. You're also an activist and musician. How do you see the relationship between your practice as a poet and performer with all the public work and activism that you do? Maybe that's a big question. Tell us about your life.
Yeah, I mean, that is a big question. I mean, it's all, I remember the poet Audre Lorde telling me that it's all the same, it's part of the same thing. I mean, the activism is in the poetry and the writing and the person. It's all part of what I called it, like the story field, or a person's story field. And so I don't think of it as separate. If I do, I'll go nuts. Like, you know, saxophone is a particular kind of discipline. Music is a particular kind of discipline, and then so is writing. You know, even writing poetry is different than writing lyrics. So it all needs tending, and my instruments all look at me like, when are you going to get over here to me? But I think of it as all the same. It's all part of the same weave. Sort of like the way you can see the weave here. It's part of the same weave. That's how I think about it.
Thank you. Missy, do we have a question?
Oh. I was saying a word.
Are you singing? Yeah.
Just trying to mimic your flu.
Good evening. I'm honored to be here. I'm Kickapoo from Kansas. We move about. I want to know what you do to recharge when you're not working, when you're not fixing the world. What do you do?
Oh man, well, we got property now by the river, and our little house is ready out there. It's not, you know, I don't need a big house. It's a little place. But I've been so busy, we haven't been able to get out there, really, to be able to move much out there. But what do I do? Oh man, actually I like cooking, and I like being around people. I love going to our dances, and you know, one thing that surprised me is when my kids came into town, both my children and a lot of the kids still live in New Mexico, and they came in not too long ago, or I go there, and we have a basket maker. We're trying to find somebody to carry on this tradition of Muskogee basket making. Mary Smith is her name. And I brought her over and brought some community members in too who wanted, and we all made baskets, traditional baskets. And I wasn't going to make one. I got little kids and everything. I was going to help them. I said, no, I'm not going to make one. Oh, here, you make one. Because I just figured I wouldn't be any good. It turned out to be I can make them, and it turns out that I find a kind of peace in doing that. There's something about it. And so then I went and made another one, and so we want to start, we were doing this kind of before, is to start doing more workshops like that, but I love it. Next I want to learn to make mats. But something like that, that's useful, and I thought that's better, because I've always been that way with the grandkids, is like I won't let them watch TV, I wouldn't let them, or get on their, I guess now it's not TV, it's the screens and stuff. We always do things. I always make them do things. They might complain about it a little, but doing something like that I think that's cool to do, or take them out. One time I got a book on animal tracks, and we went up in the Arroyo when I was living in the Acequia when I was living in New Mexico, and we went looking for animal tracks and found horse tracks, and we actually found the horse. But that's the kind of thing I like to do.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering, is there a universal definition for poetry, or is the definition of poetry diverge depending on culture?
So what's the last part of that? Is there a
definition? Is there a different definition of what is poetry as you move around with different culture?
Oh, right. Well, I don't know. I think that poetry, some people have said poetry is singing on paper, but a lot of people don't write poems down. They're more in the oral. I think it's pretty much the same. It's sort of like song language. You know, it is sort of like song language. And everybody, I mean, if you ask everybody for their definition of poetry, everybody has a little bit different definition. But the one thing I did notice, and I've noticed it changing in this country, is that when I was younger and would go out all over in other places in the world, poetry was as known and popular as, say, the songs you hear on the radio. People knew their poets and the poetry. And that wasn't that way when I was coming up in this country, necessarily. But it really hit me when I went to Medellin with one of the biggest poetry festivals in the world, and they bring poets in from all over, is that the whole community, you'd be in a huge, you know, like a place that, like they would play football here, but it would be people coming to hear poetry. And once when I was there, I've gone twice, they took a bunch of us, they would take you out to different communities and to do performances, and once they took a bunch of us to an amusement park. Can you imagine them here saying, there's a poetry reading over here, you know, and who would show up or what? There were families and little kids sitting there really listening. You know, it's like, I guess their ears have been trained to listen to poetry the same way we listen to music. And that's kind of really where it belongs, I think. It is an oral art, just like novels. You can trace novels or any of our prose forms back to oral events. And so poetry does have a place. I mean, and I think we've come to see that in these, especially these years when we've been going through COVID and isolation and anxiety and racial reckoning and story reckoning and all of this we've been going through, all of us, that so many people have turned to poetry, have turned back to poetry and have come to see the usefulness of it. One, it allows us to speak what can't be spoken. I think that's why I went to poetry, is to find a way, and of course the irony of using words to speak what can't be spoken. And, you know, it's useful, it's with us. You know, those are often what you memorize or what you know, it stays with you. And you can call it up. It's portable. And so yes, I imagine it's very similar. I mean, when I started writing poetry, of course, I was thinking, well, you know, I'm being taught all this poetry from mostly from Western Europe. But I wondered about poetry from other places, and I wondered about poetry from communities like mine, like Muskogee Creek Nation. And so then I started kind of studying West African poems that came directly out of culture, different kinds of traditional tribal cultures, and then looked at my own community, and a lot of the poetry is in the song making.
Hello? Hi, Joe. Joy, sorry. Joe. I'm Veronica Navajo, and from your book, An American Sunrise, Washing My Mother's Body was the last poem that made me cry. I wanted to know what was the last poem that made you cry.
Oh, well, the last poem, that one makes me cry still when I read it. Man. I'd have to think about that. The last poem that made me cry. I don't know. Probably this one. I think of this like as a large poem. That was the last poem that made me cry. I'm deeply touched. But my mother always, I know when I started writing that poem, I realized it's like the poem talks to me. And the poem is telling me, by writing this, it's about learning that we all learn, and I learned by writing that poem that, sometimes we miss people, or sometimes there's things we want to go back and change and we can't change it, or there's somebody we want to go back and speak to. Everything's were left in a bad way, and either they pass on or things happen and there's no way you can go back and so you can do that in a poem. You can sit and write. It doesn't have to be a poem. You can sit and write and tell people those things, and their spirit will hear it. They will feel it. You know, you can speak to. And that's what that poem was teaching me, was that, you know, I felt bad that I didn't wash my mother's body. I wanted to. And then suddenly, you know, I wasn't in charge of everything, and in comes these people in suits, which looks strange in our home because we never had people in suits there unless it was something bad. You know, here's people in suits coming in. And then they take her. I mean, it's like birth. Here it's one of the most sacred moments, you know, those beloved ones, and letting them, you know, I like the idea of those wakes and caring for them and being there, because that's an important transformational moment. And so it felt off to me. And then there started to be an argument, like, well, I want to wash her body. Well, you know, these guys came in and they wanted, and I thought, no, because it is such a tender moment. It's like birth or even carrying a child. There's a tenderness in the field around that you want to be careful. I thought, I'm not going to argue about this because it's tender. And I let it go. And here I am writing about my other side of the family and all this, and this poem came through because I needed to write it. And in the poem I realized, or the poem taught me, because the poems are teachers, is I never know what's going to happen in a poem, is it taught me that you can go back, and I could wash my mother's body, but do it now. I could write it out, I could do it, and we can do that. If there's sometimes we need to speak with someone or address something, or even address history or a historical moment, or you know, hold somebody in a poem that you miss.
Thank you so much for being here, Joy. There's 3 Salvadoran poets and writers here, and part of our history is La Matanza of 1932, where over 30,000 natives, mostly Nahua and Lenca from Central America, were massacred within a week. I've had the privilege of being in the same room as many Paiutes as they've fought and struggled to learn how to revitalize and preserve their language as it's been decimated and through all the cultural forces that they've been undergoing. And the question I have is, how have you found kind of the strength, and how have you navigated confronting the irreparable loss that so many of our communities share?
How do I navigate the loss that we all share?
Yeah, confronting it.
From what?
Confronting a lot of the irreparable loss that we share, just from history.
Well, I do it, the way I do it is through writing, or even through music too, or, you know, sharing those stories in whatever, and singing about it, and sometimes staying up all night, and, you know, we all are doing it together. I think sometimes being together is very powerful, like being together right here. I mean, that's the power of being in person, is sharing together is even more powerful, I think.
Hi, Joy. My name is Sarah. I used to lead a reading and writing group for women, femme, and non-binary POC here in Salt Lake, and one of the first books I facilitated was Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings, and that book has a very special place in my heart. And as someone who has been trying to reclaim my Indigenous heritage, your work has been really powerful for me, and I feel very emotional and very honored to be here and to hear you speak. And my question is that I want to ask on behalf of all the women, femme, and non-binary POC in our group is, do you have any words of wisdom or advice for young writers of color? Like, that was something that we always asked authors who got to be in our spaces, and I want to pass your words on to them So I'd be honored to hear what your thoughts or your advice would be to young writers of color.
I think it's important to, one, to know that you have a place, and to honor that. So much of what we have to deal with is to come up, even to know that, we go through a lot over knowing that we're even valuable, or that we have a voice, or that it matters. And advice that was given to me by an elder, from a Pueblo elder some years ago, and when she first gave it to me, I was so young and probably full of myself, and it sounded too simple, was be yourself. Now that I'm where I am, I realize how that is that's one of the hardest, it can be one of the hardest things, is to be yourself. And consider, what is yourself, Who are you? But to honor that. I mean, we're all complicated. Every one of us is full of contradictions. Being a human, I think of human being equals contradiction. We're full of contradictions, but it's really important to, honor yourself, where you come from, your place, even the hard parts. I remember there were times when I didn't think I was going to make it as a living being, and thinking, and then the way I turned it around was to learn that even the difficult or shameful parts had a place, and to not let them, to use them as strength rather than points of destruction. So that's where to start, and there's so much really fine writing going on. It's just to read, listen. It's good to make community, to find community, and to write. That's one thing that I think that people have a hard time with, and I think young women too, especially, is finding a place to write. And to keep going, because you'll fail. Sometimes people won't understand you. Sometimes in workshops, writing workshops, you may not be understood. And it's I don't know. I think sometimes people think that writing, especially poetry, is easy. That a light bulb goes off and you get inspired, and like you're an inspiration catcher. And then there you have it, and it's not like that. Sometimes you do get inspired, and sometimes, like one of the last poems I wrote, An Ordinary Morning, came very quickly, because, it had built up for a long time. But there's a lot of revision, just like our lives, like the fear thing, revision. But it's important to respect yourself and honor your story, and honor where you come from. And it's important too to feed your spirit, and I have to remind myself that, because I can get so in my imagination or my head and all, but it's important to be out on the earth, and it's important to feed your spirit, or feed the spirit of that which gives you, like this spirit of poetry. We can forget to do that and to be grateful.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions we have time for, but that's a really wonderful note to end on, a really inspiring note to end on. I think we've all caught quite a lot of inspiration from you tonight, Joy. And I think I caught an inspiration for an idea to put in President Randall's head. I also want to thank him for that scholarship. The scholarship program is overdue and an excellent initiative. But I also think we have a great football stadium that we should use for a poetry festival. It's fine as a football stadium, but maybe you'll come back for our poetry festival. I want to make an announcement that the King's English Bookstore, my favorite bookstore in the world, is selling Ms. Harjo's books upstairs, including Catching the Light, which you read from, which is just out, and also Weaving Sundown in a Scarlet Light, which is publication date is in the first week in November. You have the first chance to obtain a copy of that book here, and Joy will be signing a limited number of books. Please keep a safe distance if you ask to get your book signed. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. It's been a really incredible experience, and I want you to please join me in thanking Joy Harjo.